The year was the early 1990s, and Megadeth was on the edge of something they had been chasing for over a decade, the coveted #1 spot on the Billboard 200. Dave Mustaine, the fiery red-haired frontman, had been through a whirlwind of highs and lows. He'd been kicked out of Metallica, battled addiction, rebuilt his life, and formed a band that was now one of the pillars of thrash metal. By the time Megadeth released Countdown to Extinction in 1992, they weren't just playing for the fans, they were playing for redemption. The album was heavy yet melodic, politically charged yet accessible. It had tracks like Symphony of Destruction that were drawing radio play, and critics were calling it their most refined work yet. For Mustaine, this wasn't just another release. This was proof that he could not only survive the shadow of Metallica, he could stand shoulder to shoulder with them in the arena of mainstream success. The band's momentum was undeniable. Their world tour was planned, MTV was on board, and sales in the first week were skyrocketing. Then came the news from the label. Megadeth's Countdown to Extinction had debuted at #2 on the Billboard charts. They had come closer than ever before. But the top spot? That was taken by an unexpected rival, and not by another metal giant, not by a fellow thrash titan. No, it was an album from a completely different world of music. And worse, it was led by a song that Dave Mustaine would later call one of the most horrible hit singles he'd ever heard. For him, it wasn't just losing #1, it was losing to that. The unexpected enemy at the top. When Dave Mustaine first heard which album had blocked Countdown to Extinction from the #1 spot, he thought there had to be some mistake. Megadeth had been competing in the world of heavy metal, where chart battles were fought against the likes of Metallica, Slayer, Anthrax, and even bands like Guns N' Roses. But this was something else entirely. The album that stood at the top wasn't a metal record, it wasn't even hard rock, it was the Billy Ray Cyrus debut album, Some Gave All, a country pop juggernaut that had exploded into mainstream culture. And leading the charge was its monster hit, Achy, Breaky Heart, a song that, for many rock and metal fans, felt like nails on a chalkboard. The single was everywhere. Radio, TV, shopping malls, and even school dances. It wasn't just popular in country circles, it had somehow become a cultural phenomenon. People who never listened to country music were singing it. Morning shows played it on repeat. Dance halls choreographed entire routines to it. For Mustaine, the frustration was deep. He'd spent years perfecting Megadeth's sound, razor-sharp riffs, intelligent lyrics, complex arrangements, only to be stopped in his tracks by a song with 3 chords and a hook that some critics called painfully simple. In later interviews, Dave would openly admit that this one stung, not because Billy Ray Cyrus did anything wrong. After all, he was playing to his audience, and he played well, but because Megadeth was so close. #2 on the Billboard chart was a career high, but it felt like a cruel joke that their shot at the top had been stolen by what Mustaine saw as a novelty hit. The record label tried to put a positive spin on it. No.2 still meant platinum sales. No.2 still meant sold-out tours. But inside, Dave knew this would go down as one of the great what-ifs in his career. What if Countdown to Extinction had been released at a different time? What if Achy, Breaky Heart hadn't been such a runaway hit? What if Megadeth had finally earned that #1 banner? But the chart loss didn't just bruise Mustaine's ego, it lit a fire under him. If he couldn't take the top spot with Countdown, he was going to push harder, write sharper, and prove that heavy metal still had the power to dominate the mainstream. The problem was, that loss also brought back some of his deepest old wounds, and those wounds traced all the way back to the day he was fired from Metallica. Old wounds resurface. For Dave Mustaine, the sting of losing the #1 spot to Some Gave All wasn't just about chart numbers, it was about history repeating itself. Once again, he was in second place, watching someone else stand in the spotlight. The memory that came flooding back was from 1983, the year his life changed forever. He was in Metallica, living and breathing the band's early chaos, when he was suddenly told to pack his bags and go. No warning, no last show, just a bus ticket home from New York to California and a bitter taste in his mouth. Metallica went on to dominate the metal world. Their albums topped charts, their tours sold out stadiums, and their name became synonymous with heavy metal itself. For Dave, every success they had was a reminder of what he lost, and what he was determined to build on his own terms. By the time Megadeth formed in 1983, Dave's mission wasn't just to play music. It was to prove that he could outplay, outwrite, and outlast his former bandmates, and in many ways he did. Megadeth carved out their own kingdom in metal, earning a devoted fan base and a sound that was uniquely theirs. But here he was again, in 1992, tasting second place. And this time, it wasn't James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich who stood above him. It was Billy Ray Cyrus, a man in a cowboy hat, singing about his heart. It was almost laughable, almost, except to Dave, it wasn't funny. Because for him, success wasn't just measured in record sales or critical acclaim. It was about being undeniably the best at a given moment. And being almost the best felt like losing. He knew Countdown to Extinction had all the ingredients for a #1. The production was tight, courtesy of producer Max Norman. The songwriting was mature, without losing the Megadeth edge. Tracks like Sweating Bullets and Foreclosure of a Dream were resonating deeply with fans. The band was at their peak musically, and critics were taking them seriously in ways they hadn't before. But despite all that, the timing was wrong. Billy Ray's album was selling in staggering numbers, breaking country music records and crossing over into the pop charts. The momentum was too strong to beat. To the public, this was just a quirky footnote in music history. That time, Megadeth almost hit #1, but lost to a country singer. To Dave, it was personal. And if there's one thing you learn about Dave Mustaine, it's that when something hits him personally, it becomes fuel for the fire. That fire would carry Megadeth into the next leg of their tour, into more aggressive songwriting sessions, and into an era where the band would push their boundaries harder than ever before. But before that push came, there was a storm brewing inside Mustaine that few people saw, a storm that would show itself in subtle but powerful ways. The frustration goes public. In the months following the release of Countdown to Extinction, Megadeth hit the road for one of their most successful tours yet. The shows were electric, crowds were massive, reviews were glowing. But behind the scenes, Dave Mustaine was still carrying that sting from the charts. It wasn't long before the press caught on. Interviewers kept bringing it up. The infamous #2 debut, the country album that stood in their way, and that unavoidable song, Achy, Breaky Heart. At first, Mustaine brushed it off, giving short answers and shifting the conversation back to the music. But the more it came up, the less he could hide his irritation. Soon, his honesty started to slip out. In one interview, when asked about losing the #1 spot, he laughed bitterly and said, "We lost to that? Are you kidding me?" In another, he called the song horrible and admitted that it drove him crazy to think about how close Megadeth had come. Fans started quoting the remarks, and it became a running joke in the metal community. One part sympathy, one part disbelief. It wasn't just about taste in music. To Mustaine, it was about the nature of the industry. He'd spent years crafting songs with depth, complexity, and meaning, only to see the charts dominated by a track that seemed, to him, like the definition of disposable pop culture. It raised bigger questions in his mind. What did it really take to hit #1? Was it about art, or just about timing and mass appeal? On stage, though, he didn't let it slow him down. If anything, the frustration made him perform harder. His solos cut deeper. His voice carried more venom. The band fed off that energy, and the fans could feel it. Songs like Symphony of Destruction and Skin on My Teeth became anthems, not just of rebellion, but of defiance. The sound of a band that refused to be knocked down by the pop machine. But Mustaine's comments had a side effect. They kept the story alive. Every time he mentioned Billy Ray Cyrus in an interview, the press ran with it. Headlines like Mustaine slams achy, breaky heart popped up in music magazines and rock radio chatter. The more it was repeated, the more the moment became locked in music history. The tale of how a country hit kept Megadeth from the top of the mountain. Still, Mustaine knew he couldn't dwell on it forever. The tour was grueling, and the schedule left little time for brooding. There were shows to play, fans to meet, and new songs already starting to form in his head. But deep down, that No.2 debut had planted a seed. Quiet promise to himself that the next time Megadeth took a shot at the top, they would be unstoppable. Little did he know, the road ahead would bring even bigger challenges, and not all of them would come from other bands. Turning second place into fuel. By the time Countdown to Extinction had settled into its place as one of Megadeth's most celebrated albums, the No.2 chart debut had gone from a fresh wound to a lingering scar. Dave Mustaine wasn't the kind of person to let something like that fade quietly into the background. If anything, it hardened his resolve. The tour for Countdown was massive, stretching across continents and bringing in crowds that rivaled any metal band of the era. Megadeth was riding a commercial high, but Mustaine's mind was already on what came next. He wanted to take the momentum and push it into a record that would not only top the charts, but cement Megadeth as the heavy metal force in the mainstream. The band was in a unique position. They were no longer just a cult favorite for thrash diehards. Their songs were being played on rock radio. MTV was spinning their videos. They were getting coverage in magazines that didn't normally bother with metal acts. In short, Megadeth was in the big leagues, and Mustaine wasn't about to let that chance slip away. Backstage and in hotel rooms, he was scribbling down lyrics, jotting riffs, and thinking about new directions the band could take. The competitive fire that had fueled him since his Metallica days was burning brighter than ever. It wasn't just about Billy Ray Cyrus anymore. It was about proving that a heavy metal band could dominate a world that seemed increasingly obsessed with simpler, radio-friendly hits. The music industry in the early 90s was shifting fast. Grunge had exploded, with Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Soundgarden reshaping rock radio. Alternative was the new buzzword, and even some metal bands were softening their edges to adapt. But Mustaine was determined to keep Megadeth sharp, technical, and unapologetically metal, while still finding ways to appeal to a wider audience. The challenge was finding that balance. Too heavy, and they risked alienating casual listeners who had discovered them through Symphony of Destruction. Too soft, and they'd lose the core fans who had been with them since Killing Is My Business. And business is good. It was a tightrope walk, and Mustaine knew one wrong move could knock them off the mainstream radar. But he also knew something else. Megadeth worked best under pressure. Every setback in his career had led to a surge of creativity, and this was no different. The sting of that No.2 debut wasn't holding him back. It was pushing him forward. He began telling interviewers that the next Megadeth album would be bigger, better, and smarter. He wasn't shy about saying he wanted it to be a chart topper. To some, it sounded like arrogance. To Mustaine, it was just honesty. What he couldn't have known was that while he was plotting his next move, the music world was about to throw another curveball at him, one that would test Megadeth's ability to adapt without losing their identity.